Jason from Friday the 13th, Michael Myers from Halloween, Dennis Quaid from The Substance, and many more iconic horror characters sometimes can give me the shivers. And over the years, there has been a lot of characters in the world of pro wrestling that has sent chills down people's spines. Spooky season is upon us here at Shockwave Sports, and I started to think about who is in fact the scariest pro wrestler in history. So with that being said, I'm Ace from Shockwave Sports, and let's look back at some of the spookiest pro wrestling gimmicks of all time. Disclaimer, we are strictly talking about characters as in the gimmicks of each wrestler, not the person themselves or whatever actual scary things they might have done beyond the ring. So maybe in Bret Hart's world, Goldberg is the biggest horror villain, but not for this video. And we are going to determine how spooky they are with my spooky meter. Which is just me giving them a percentage on how cool and spooky I think they are. Alright, let's start with an underrated gem from 1995 with Wayan Mercy. Based off of the character Max Cady from the Martin Scorsese film Cape Fear, Wayan Mercy gave that same creepy vibe Robert De Niro had in that film. Despite only having 10 matches, his promo work and outfits inspired the late great Bray Wyatt years later. I mean, just listen to these promos.
It's peaceful outdoors, nobody around here to mess with him. The wind's out here feeling good on him. I'm just a peaceful individual who likes no problems. And that's the way things are going to be when I get to the WWF.
We start remembering all these things, these horrible things, these travesties that have happened to us in our lives. But in our dreams, we're superheroes. And in our dreams, we can fix everything. We dream of revenge. We dream of payback.
More on Bray Wyatt later. But because he inspired future talents, I'm going to give him a 55% on the spooky. Around that time, Mrs. Foley's baby boy was coming into WWE as Mankind. Now, you Attitude Era heads might remember Mankind as this heartwarming underdog in the later 1990s, but before all that, he was hanging out in boiler rooms and scaring Jim Ross in interviews. He even got Paul Bearer to portray The Undertaker at SummerSlam. But because he became such a lighthearted character only a short time later, I'm gonna give him a 45% on the spooky meter. Still an icon though, of course. But let's look at Mankind's main foe around that time, The Undertaker. This will always be one of those wrestlers where you ask the question to yourself, what more can I say about him? People were legit terrified when this dude walked down the ramp. Imagine being a 5-year-old Hulk Hogan fan, and then this almost 7-foot goth zombie flips him over and drops him on his head to win the match. Over the years though, The Undertaker seemed to lay off that initial spooky aura. Yes, we did have crazy moments like him capturing Stephanie McMahon, or him killing his own manager in cement, but there were also long stretches of him riding down a motorcycle and being just a guy. Which, that was also great too, but I gotta factor that into the spooky meter. So Undertaker, who is a legend, gets an 87% on the spooky meter. During The Undertaker's spooky era though, we had one of the greatest debuts in history, when his on-screen brother Kane interrupts a Hell in a Cell match and rips the door off. Kane was all of a sudden the new face of fear in WWE, and people loved it. Having the origin story like a comic book of once thought to be burnt alive in a house with Undertaker's parents in it. Kane showing up in a slasher villain-like mask gave him an interesting look, and people would speculate what was under that mask. Now, Kane's spooky aura did go away quite fast, if you ask me. It was only a year later he was saying "suck it" on TV with X-Pac, but in the ring he was still feared by the talent. Now, I did mention the mask made him intriguing. Well, years later, they decided to finally show us what Kane looked like under the mask. And, well, it just didn't work well at first. But once we got over that and saw it more as a mental scar under the mask than physical, Kane did some crazy things when he got unmasked, setting Jim Ross on fire, and did something to Shane McMahon that I am not sure I can explain on YouTube. But it seemed like Kane had momentum again. But some might argue the character overstayed its welcome. Being one of the most loyal wrestlers to WWE, I'm sure was successful for Glenn Jacobs as a person and talent, but caused a lot of things to change with Kane over the years. Whether it's trying to put the mask back on or becoming a corporate suit, nothing seemed to have hit as well as the original version of Kane in 1998. So spooky meter time, and this is a hard one. I think because of all its setbacks, I gotta put it behind Undertaker at 77%. The Attitude Era had some other spooky stuff going on though, besides Kane and Undertaker. The Brood was formed during the Attitude Era and became a launching pad for arguably two of the greatest tag teams in WWE history. Led by Gangrel, this vampire-like faction would rise from fire and walk down to the ring and spit blood at the audience. They would even sometimes dump gallons of blood on the wrestler in or around the ring. Edge and Christian were the first iteration, and the Hardys were in the latter. The Brood had one of the best theme songs of all time. Sometimes that's all it takes to get over. Theme songs are super important to the overall presentation, especially when you want to present something supernatural. The Brood vibes were so over, Edge would use it during his post-retirement comeback in WWE, and then in AEW most recently. I'm gonna give it a 70% on the spooky meter, because of how much it's still brought up and how wrestlers still try to pay tribute to it. We talked about some of the Attitude Era greats. Let's change the channel and let's see what was happening on WCW at the time. The NWO were the biggest heels in wrestling, and WCW needed a hero. The heroes of the late 90s, though, were not these bright-colored superheroes anymore. They were dark and edgy and wore a lot of leather. Sting decided to revamp his character from a colorful face-painted American hero to a shadowy figure that stands up in the rafters watching over WCW. Taking a lot of inspiration from the movie The Crow, Sting was able to create a character he pretty much used for the rest of his career. There were different variations, of course, over the years, much like Kane and Undertaker. You have to keep changing so you don't get stale. But Sting seemed very strict about always keeping that Crow vibe moving forward. Even when Joker Sting came around, he was still using inspiration from a popular character that some people did find spooky and creepy. Maybe it's recency bias, but because of how good his retirement was, and how much he was able to protect the character, I'm giving him an 80%. Big fan of the icon Sting. Now, once we get past the Monday Night Wars, the spooky supernatural characters were either not successful or just not being a part of the show anymore. With the rise of UFC and other combat sports, WWE was heading towards a more real-looking product, having athletes like Kurt Angle or Brock Lesnar put on stellar matches. A couple of years into the era, we got a spooky character that will still make appearances to this day. The Boogeyman had a crazy entrance, with a giant clock that he smashes on his head, a heart around his chest, and after he defeats an opponent, he puts worms in their mouth. Talk about the ick this dude would give people. Never won a title or anything, but still will return for an anniversary or legend show, so the guy seems well liked in the promotion. I'm gonna give him a 51%, probably a little too high, but I have fond memories of the Boogeyman since I grew up in this era. In 2006, WWE relaunched ECW. It would now be a weekly show airing Tuesdays on the Sci-Fi Channel. The first match on this channel had the Sandman versus a zombie, so you knew right away we were about to see some supernatural characters. But we're not here to talk about the zombie, but 41% on the spooky meter, if you were wondering. We are here to talk about Kevin Thorne and Ariel, the newest pro wrestling vampires at the time. They had a really cool look, but other than joining Elijah Burke's New Breed faction, they did not do much other than that. I'm gonna give them a 49%. Just did not do enough for me, even with an interesting idea and look. During this time, a lot of supernatural characters were all just jobbers. They might have a cool look or moveset, but it just would not click. Until one man changed all of that. Husky Harris showed up in the NXT game show era, but soon was repackaged when he went back to developmental, becoming the leader of a cult-like faction called the Wyatt family. You knew something was different with this character. The way he talked and carried himself. He'd creepily sit on his rocking chair while his family beats up other wrestlers. Luke Harper and Eric Rowan were his, well, sheep doing his bids. Later, they added the black sheep, Braun Strowman. Despite some booking mistakes, this version of Bray Wyatt is still widely praised to this day. It's an 89% on the spooky meter for me. The positives outweigh the negatives when it comes to Bray Wyatt, at least for me. Some of you might argue that this next character should be lumped into the original Bray Wyatt character, but I do not think that would show you all how revolutionary this character was. Bray Wyatt would later introduce the Fiend. Bray would act as a kids show host in the Firefly Funhouse, but when it was time to wreak havoc, his alter ego, he called the Fiend, would come out. The first visual fans saw of the Fiend inside of an arena was him holding a lantern made out of, I'm assuming, some kind of wax figure of Bray's head. His first match against Finn Balor still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. He does moves like twisting his neck around to make it look like a slasher villain kill, or Shades of Mankind using the Man of a Claw signature move. The Fiend also had some pretty bad booking. Even other wrestlers like Seth Rollins have been very vocal about how badly the Fiend was portrayed in some matches. But I never thought in modern WWE, something like the Fiend can both happen, in general, like just happen, and then it actually works when it comes to the character, of course. The memory of the Fiend and Bray Wyatt as a whole still lives on, with Bo Dallas now leading the Wyatt Six as Uncle Howdy. The Fiend is a 95% for me. The impact this character will make for a whole generation will be huge. Thank you all for watching this video. I had a fun time putting it together. Let me know if I missed any other spooky wrestlers you want me to talk about. I am super down to make a part 2 to this video. I wanted to just talk about the ones that always stuck out to me growing up. And make sure to check out our WWE 2K series on the channel. It is the #1 destination for your Create a Wrestler. See you all in the next video.